Today's show is sponsored by BMC, and BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? The A game is when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/agame. That's bmc.com/agame.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope everybody is continuing to start to get into the springtime, at least in this part of the world. Kind of an interesting week for us. It's another Sunday Perspective show. And normally this time of the year in North Carolina, as Aaron has mentioned, I think I've mentioned on shows, it's kind of the time when spring is kicking in and, pollen kicks in. And for me, it means head congestion kicks in. And sometimes I sound a little bit nasally. But what's interesting today, it snowed. Well, at least it snowed in part of North Carolina. So we are definitely in that part of the year where the winter weather is still around. We still got a couple weeks until spring officially kicks in. And so things are just a little weird on the weather front. Hope everybody's doing well. As we mentioned last week, our kind of thoughts and prayers go out to the folks in the Ukraine and everybody kind of affected by what's going on over there. I looked at our stats, unfortunately, still not seeing the listeners that we saw from the Ukraine, so hopefully they are safe and they are focused on what they have to focus on. And like we mentioned, whenever life hopefully gets back to some sort of normalcy for them, we will be here, talking about technology and hopefully taking their mind off of it. But kind of want to talk about an interesting thing. So I mentioned, I think I mentioned in a show last week, or I sort of hinted around at it. I took a different job. I enjoyed 6 years of a lot of fun at Red Hat. Spent a lot of time focused on cloud native technologies and Kubernetes and helping people migrate to the cloud and all those sort of things. And awesome job, really fun people, very thankful for everything that happened there. Took a different job, went to a smaller company, starting at a company called Solo.io. They're in the sort of application security, service mesh, API space. And I only mention that because, for the last, I guess we've been doing this now for 12 years, Aaron and I have always sort of kept the show somewhat independent of what we do in our day-to-day jobs. And part of that is just so there's kind of a clear line of demarcation of what we do in our day jobs and what we do here. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap in terms of some of the technologies that we work on, personally on a day-to-day basis versus the things that we, talk about on here. But I only highlight it just because sometimes, people want to know, hey, what do you do in your day job, or we run into each other, or there's some things. So, anyways, our goal is to always sort of have a little bit of a gap between what we do and what's on the show. There are going to be some times when we bring people that we work with on the show because ultimately what they're doing is an interesting in the space. So, anyways, I just kind of want to highlight that for transparency, so nobody kind of wonders about those things. But what was interesting to me this week is obviously, you start somewhere new and, you sort of think a space because you've been following it or you've been keeping up with what's going on. And then you really sort of start diving into it, kind of digging into it. And, for me, we happened to have what was called SoloCon, which is the solo user conference or, show, their version of a reInvent kind of thing. And what was interesting to me was, it's always interesting to sort of hear the users of your technology speak about what they do. And I'm not going to dive into all those. I'll put a link in the show notes if anybody wants to kind of go see what's going on in the world of service mesh and API gateways and how people, companies are using that, in production, trying to improve their business. What was interesting to me was sort of this thing, and I guess I've sort of paid attention to it, but having lived in the world that I lived in before, which was more sort of vertical stacks of technology and a lot of different things together, it sort of dawned on me is we have this interesting phenomenon, which is to a certain extent, the technologies around us, whether that's infrastructure going from data center to cloud or the networks around us becoming more distributed, i.e., the way that we think about networks, where we put firewalls and demarcation points and so forth has sort of, exploded to the point where we talk about things like zero trust networking and just, lots of different places where we go, okay, what is the edge of the network? Is there an edge of the network anymore? Or is everything just, kind of have to be authenticated and so forth? And then even with our applications, we've talked for years about sort of this, modernization things that happening, the kind of the distribution of applications, whether that's from monoliths to microservices or, more and more integration with APIs or application services that you reach via an API. And then I got to thinking about it, and what's interesting is so our applications are very much distributing. They're sort of spreading out, and this has been going on for a number of years. But on the flip side, and I this sort of dawned on me a little more this week as I was listening to certain companies talk about the way that they deliver these kind of cross-functional services, things that are somewhat networking related and security related or application related and API related, is that the teams that are delivering these things have had to sort of mash together, right? They've had to sort of cross boundary lines. So we have this interesting kind of crossroads that we're at, which is the applications, the technology, the infrastructure, the networks are becoming more and more distributed. They're spreading out. And the teams that have to support these in order to be able to do this in a highly efficient way and in an agile way are having to sort of come together, right? They're sort of mashing together more and more, and the technology is sort of splitting up more and more. And so I thought it'd be sort of interesting on today's show to kind of dig into that in a little more detail, just kind of put some perspective on it. And again, it was one of those things that I think I sort of knew peripherally and tried sort of thought about peripherally, but it really kind of got me thinking about how this sort of shapes this middle blob of things that we have between purely an application and purely infrastructure that sort of lives in the middle. And I guess we sort of call that platform, but platform has been such a term that has morphed and changed over the years. I thought it'd be sort of interesting to dig into that. And for me, I have sort of a reason to sort of have some newfound, want to have perspective on that and to dive into it. So I'm going to dive into that right after the break. Today's episode is brought to you by Polyscale. Polyscale is a no-code database edge cache for the world's most demanding data-driven applications. Scaling data-driven applications while maintaining a great user experience is hard. Milliseconds matter, and developers and DBAs have a myriad of technologies to engineer and integrate, involving complex layers of caching, replicas, or even full database migrations, taking too much of your valuable time. Enter Polyscale. Polyscale's Edge platform is an AI-driven database cache as a service that takes your current database and scales it infinitely, and with no code and no applications or databases to change. Polyscale intelligently caches data and queries compute closer to the user, providing extremely low latency database reads from anywhere in the world, improving application performance and decreasing costs. It takes just minutes to set up and is truly plug and play. Check out Polyscale's Global Edge data platform, www.polyscale.ai, and sign up for a free account today. And we're back. And, folks, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I kind of want to dig into this, what feels like kind of a crossroads that we're at between the technology very much distributing and going in kind of more and more directions, and the teams and the groups that have to sort of maintain this, or the way that we build and maintain these things. How do we go about doing that? And, one thing I want to kind of highlight as I was thinking about doing the intro and then sort of starting this section was, I don't want anyone to think that, Brian took this new job and now he's just going to use this as an excuse to sort of, talk about whatever he works on. That's never been the case what we did. So that's not the intention of what I want to do here. It just, sometimes when you get exposed to things at a deeper level, you start to sort of go, okay, does that change the way that you've thought about things in the past? And what it all sort of got me thinking about was, listened to a number of companies who had spoke at this event about what they were doing. And again, it was far less about like, hey, we use this technology. It was more about, how do we get to some level of success? And again, the goal of most of the time in these talks that you see at events is never like, hey, I woke up this morning and our business had a Kubernetes problem, or we woke up this morning and our company had a service mesh problem, or whatever, serverless problem. They wake up and they go, our business wants to reach our customers in better ways, in easier ways, and broader ways. We want to do that using the most efficient technologies possible. In many cases, it's we need to be able to keep up with very new and innovative technologies, because if you're dealing with mobile or some of the things on the web, things change a lot, and you don't want to give a perception to your customers that your company is based on old technology, right? You don't want their user experience to be bad. And then to a certain extent, it's always like, well, we have these application teams and we want to, hide and abstract from them as much complexity as possible. We want them to stay focused on, building great experiences, building great business logic, analyzing data. And what you end up finding in the middle is like, there's this big space in the middle. We went through a period of time when it was, hey, we're trying to figure out how to get to the cloud. I think most companies have more or less figured out how to get to the cloud if they're going to the cloud. And we still obviously see, lots and lots of parts of portfolios and how many applications customers have in the cloud. But for those who, have gone to the cloud or going to the cloud, they've sort of figured that out. And they realize, once I get to the cloud, there's a level of it that's infrastructure, and it's still servers and network and storage, and essentially somebody else is sort of managing that for them, and that's fine. And then you still have application developers building, Java apps or Python apps or Ruby or whatever they're building. And then in the middle is this sort of great mismatch of stuff, right? To a certain extent, it's the things we talked about a few shows again, right? It's the sort of DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE kind of functionality. And again, those things exist because we no longer have these sort of siloed applications. We no longer have these applications that never get updated, right? Things are, changing more frequently. They are, being updated more frequently. We're experimenting with them. Maybe we're doing canary deployments or blue-green deployments, or we're doing A/B testing, or we're having to do fast failover, whatever that might be. And what sort of dawned on me was, I think as an industry, we would sort of build these layers, and we would say, well, this is infrastructure as a service, and then there's this sort of platform thing in the middle, and then there's like software as a service, right? And it was very clear to us what the infrastructure layer was, right? Network, compute, storage, those sort of things. And it was very clear to us what the software layer was, right? It was the actual application that was being delivered and the thing that users interact with or other applications interact with. And then platform as a service, I think, went through this interesting thing where it was always like, well, it's Heroku. And for a decade, people have kind of tried to reinvent Heroku, and they've tried to, create the same experience. And the whole idea was, well, we want developers to be really productive, therefore we'll hide a bunch of things from them. And PaaS has sort of gone through some ups and downs, and a lot of times it really just boiled down to being, well, was it too opinionated to be successful, or was it too opinionated to allow lots of different use cases, or was it not opinionated enough to be successful, or maybe it wasn't opinionated enough to be able to be successful for a bunch of use cases, and somewhere in between there has sort of been the answer, but it's also been very developer-centric, sort of application-centric. And I think what we're seeing is, now that we have these other things in the middle, whether it's application services that you're going to consume as, database as a service or message queue as a service or whatever it's going to be, or whether it's, things trying to, manage how your applications deal with each other and do it in a more dynamic way. So, how do they get their certs such that they can do, security and authentication or encryption? How do they figure out, who they're allowed to talk to? And, is that, kind of a all-you-can-eat kind of conversation? Should it be rate limited? Should there be policies around it? How do we, manage APIs? And APIs have sort of evolved, right? It's there are APIs for applications, but now we see things like, I don't know, whether it's like GraphQL and other things which are sort of aggregating APIs and sort of looking at them differently. And so you have this sort of layers of pseudo network teams that it's sort of not the underlying network like Ethernet or fast Ethernet or gig Ethernet or whatever, but it's sort of like the networking for like Kubernetes. So it's almost like a little bit layer above that. And then you've got, the stuff that is, security. So how do we do zero trust? How do we, filter certain things? How do we rate limit certain things? How do we authenticate things and do encryption between them? And then we have, how do I figure out where the services are that, are going to attach to my application, right? How do I know how to find APIs? How do I know how to find services? How do I know how to discover these things? And it feels to me a little bit like, that has become the new platform, if you will. And I don't know if it's necessarily like platform as a service, but it's sort of the new middle layer of the cake, and it's a big, fat, wide layer of the cake that's sort of application services, platform services. And what's interesting is, we've seen a lot of suggestions of, you should have a platform services team. And I think for a while there it was, they should be focused on self-service, and they should be focused on just defining certain applications or certain ways that things can work, kind of, the whole sort of like, build the McDonald's menu for them so developers can come in and go, yes, I want a number 3, or I want a number 7, or I want it this large, or whatever. And it feels like there's somewhere else that this needs to go. And again, the reason for it is the challenge of platform services has always been, the goal has been, I want to abstract as many things away for the developers. I want to make it as simple for them as possible. I want to make it easy for them to connect to the things they want, hide a lot of the stuff that they don't want to know about, and ultimately, allow them to be really effective, especially in this new ever-changing world in which things are moving quickly and they don't necessarily know where everything is, but they, whatever that is. And then, how do you do that in an interesting way? And I think we learned between sort of the opinionated PaaS days and the sort of Kubernetes days, that there's somewhere in between there. And so, to me, it's a really interesting, it feels like sort of a next generation of, what is platform going to mean? And I don't by any means sort of claim to know exactly what that looks like. I saw, like I said, I mentioned having been at this event this week, so saw some sort of interesting case studies from companies who had talked about how they do it, and it was sort of an interesting mix of, do they think about their world as sort of isolated resources for individual teams? How much of it becomes multi-tenant? How much does it start as a centralized way of thinking about things versus it starts as a distributed way of thinking about things? And what was very obvious was there wasn't sort of one path. There wasn't sort of one distinct way that was right. And what that sort of led me to believe was that, we're going to see a lot of different opportunities to figure out how to build that platformy layer of, and layers and stuff. So anyways, it's a space that's, I think, very interesting. I think it struggles in that, again, the technology is distributing things around a lot. The way to get to dealing with the overlapping layers that it now involves things moving around, again, network security, APIs, authentication, encryption, all those sort of services that are in there somewhere, application acceleration, whatever those are. Those teams that deliver that are kind of getting mashed together in order to be able to go, I can't wait on handing off a ticket to somebody else or whatever it is. So it's a space, I think, I don't want to call it something dumb like Platform 2.0, but I think we're gonna realize that, there's been a lot we've learned from sort of the PaaS days of almost a decade ago to what we've learned through the sort of distributed with optionality sort of Kubernetes things that we've learned. People are still making decisions about when do I leverage a cloud service, when do I run an application service like local on the rest of my platform. That's still, got some ironing out to do in terms of, what makes sense for me. Not everything is going to be exactly the same. We're going to see kind of a mix and match of that. And figuring out, like, ultimately, is there good best practices for making things easy for developers, abstracting away what you should abstract away, exposing certain things that make sense, and then really figuring out, like, what does that platform best practice look like? Because I think the bottom layer is pretty well defined. Assuming you go to the cloud sort of takes care of infrastructure for you. The application teams sort of know what they want to do. They're still kind of telling us the best way to do things like self-service or what should they expose and so forth. But the middle feels like a place that, we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes. We're learning more. And it feels like we're at sort of a next wave, if you will, of figuring out what that middle looks like. So no kind of clear answers at this point, I think. A lot of interesting evolving technologies in this space, and definitely something that obviously I have now a vested interest in caring about this, but ultimately trying to figure out what it looks like. Would love to get people's feedback. How are you managing that middle, whatever platform means to you, whatever platform services mean to you, whatever platform teams mean to you. I'd love to kind of get your feedback on what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what lessons have you learned over the last 3 or 4 years, what things did you try that you thought, oh, those are going to work, and they didn't, what things kind of organically evolved because your teams just started doing stuff. I'd love to get people's feedback on that. Again, as always, you can hit us up in DMs. You can tweet to us at the Cloudcast.net, show at thecloudcast.net. Email works great as well, but would love to get people's feedback because to me, it's a space that a lot of us can learn from. We've sort of, like I said, certain things have evolved, but love to get your feedback on this. So anyways, a topic that I've been thinking about all week for obvious reasons, but it feels like it's a topic that, is an evolving space and probably something we should be digging into more on the show. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for listening. This is the Wednesday show is a big milestone show for us. We'll kind of talk about what it means on Wednesday, but thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Stay safe out there. Stay warm if it's in a place you're cold, and stay cool if spring's starting to catch up to you. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.